Hello, and welcome to this HelloID provisioning product release video for January 2021. HelloID provisioning is a 100% born in the cloud, easy to configure and maintain user provisioning solution. It helps organizations to fully automate the user lifecycle management in the network by connecting the HR or SIS as a source system. Every change in this source is detected and processed into the network. No more worries about stale user accounts, accumulation of licenses or access rights, manual user management, or compliancy issues. Please note that in this video, we will only show the new functionalities for the January 2021 release. Please go to docs.helloid.com or our YouTube channel for more videos. Let's get started. In this video, we'd like to start with a PowerPoint presentation and then demo the new functionalities for the January 2021 release. We have two new items in this release. Our first item is the dynamic permissions for a PowerShell target connector. In addition to the previously introduced in-condition functionality used for filtering contract data based on the conditions of a business rule, we now have the possibility to manage the grant or revocation of a dynamic permission based on the data which is in condition of a business rule. This new feature allows us to dynamically calculate the set of permissions which will get granted or revoked from the user account when the data of a person or contract changes. For example, if you would like a person to automatically gain access to a department share inside the network based on the department data of the contract the person has actively been assigned to, or in case the person has multiple contracts active by the scope of the business rule, it will automatically try to grant access to multiple department shares, as they are included in the condition of this business rule. This does not apply to department data, but can be used by all the contract attributes of a person's contract. Our second item is target-specific DC and AD. We introduced the option to specify a specific domain controller to be used for handling the events, as they are being sent to the HelloID provisioning agent. With this option, we can guarantee you the same domain controller is used to handle all of your requests being sent to your on-premise Active Directory environment. By defining a specific domain controller, we don't have to wait for the other controllers to replicate their data. This new functionality can be used to dynamically resolve a domain controller or even specify a static or static set of domain controllers responsible for handling the request. We'll show you how this works in detail in the demo. Now, the first item we'd like to show you is how the new dynamic permission functionality works. The dynamic permissions are added as a new type to the already existing entitlements, like account access, and from the permission tab, the static permissions, which we already had before. On the right side, we now have the option to create a dynamic permission. As you can see in this example, it's also possible to create multiple dynamic permissions, which can be easily achieved by clicking this plus icon and creating a new type. Here, we already created one for department shares and another one for team shares. For each type, we need to have a script in place which is responsible for calculating the desired permission set and the effective permission to be processed, whether it's a newly granted permission or the revocation of an existing permission. Basically, this works by comparing the current permissions, which are already being assigned to a user, to a list of desired permissions, and between those, we can calculate the delta. With this delta, we can do a few things. We can assign a new permission to be granted, update an existing permission, or revoke a permission which is no longer valid for that user. The calculation of this works on the previously introduced in condition. Its functionality was explained in the previous release. So if you'd like to learn more about this, please check out the video for the December 2020 release. With this functionality, we can identify the contracts for a user which are valid for and in scope of a business rule. For example, if we have a business rule in place and we scope this rule on a specific type, you can say for the in-condition value of this rule in case a person has multiple contracts, which of the departments are valid for one or more of the person's contracts for which the dynamic permission will get granted. What you can see is that if you have calculated the result, we also have scripting in place for granting the permission, and we also have a script for revoking existing permissions. Another minor feature we introduced by creating this new functionality is the introduction of multiple audit log messages, which can be written directly to the HelloID audit log. Previously, it was only possible to write one audit message per user for each action, but now you can write more than one. As you can see here, we can write multiple audit messages for the granting and revoking of a permission. This new functionality is not limited to the new dynamic permissions. It's also available inside the other Powershell connector events. For example, the account create, account enable, disable, delete, or update event. You can add this to the audit log object and send this back to HelloID by using the result object. Moving on to the business rules. Let's have a closer look on how to configure the business rules using dynamic permission. In this situation, we already created one to grant the newly introduced dynamic permission type, as you can see over here, where you can add a new permission by clicking the Entitlement Add for the selected target system. In this scenario, we were working with the PowerShell system as a system name, and as you can see, the previous created department and team shares from the connector are available as a dynamic permission. We already added this to the business rule to see what would happen when we assigned it, based on the in-condition parameter for the department and team shares which group memberships will get assigned to the user. To show the results, we first need to run an evaluation on this one. On this evaluation screen, there are also some minor improvements. We replaced the block status and removed it from the entitlement screen. This block status is now directly visible in the evaluation overview. In the previous releases of HelloID, when you ran an evaluation having thresholds in place, you didn't see them in the evaluation report, but could only see them in the blocked entitlements overview after you executed the enforcement. Now we show them up front during the execution of an evaluation and showing the block status over here. Having a closer look at this screen, you can see we also have the update as an operation status, which we didn't have before. The update status is a new introduction in this release indicating when a dynamic permission needs to be updated. This also works for the update event of accounts in the same way. When we update a person, this person didn't show up in the evaluation report because the update isn't a real entitlement. Since this release, we will show all the update operations here. Let's take a minor step sideways. The blocked is based on thresholds and will be used for safety purposes, since this release will enable the thresholds by default for newly added systems. Unfortunately, the systems which are already in place will not get their thresholds enabled by default, but this can be done manually. By default, we only enable the revoke thresholds for the revoke of an account, account access, or for one of the permissions and dynamic permissions entitlements having their default set to an initial value of 1. This means no actions will be executed during enforcements unless you approve them manually. This also means you always need to configure them manually to fit the needs of your system. For the thresholds, we also introduced a new type called the update threshold. The update threshold is there to block account updates or dynamic permissions updates. This is a new type of threshold which was not available before. Not only for target systems, but also for source systems, we have enabled the default threshold. This also applies to newly added source systems only. Systems which were already in place will not get them enabled by default. For source systems, we enable them for the removal of persons. So when the removal exceeds the limit, and in this case, we have the default set to 1, the entire import will get blocked, and no source data will be imported back into HelloID until the exceeding threshold issue has been resolved. Let's go back to our business rules. From the evaluation, we can go to the entitlement overview where we remove the current block status from the status column. So the blocked state is not visible in this overview anymore. When there are blocked items, they will automatically be shown in the evaluation overview. From the enforcement, you will find them directly in the blocked actions, which will look the same as before. The actions which will get blocked, you can approve manually in here in case the blocked actions aren't correct. For the dynamic permission, you can also see if it's blocked and what type of permissions are blocked. We have the same thing here for the already granted permission. We have the person Carlos. Carlos is in scope for the business rule we created before, and as you can see here, he has been granted the dynamic permission for team shares. But Carlos is also in here where he gets the department shares granted. What you can see is that when we click on this item, you can see which of the departments are used for granting the permission to Carlos's account. From this example case, he will receive the toys, outdoors, and music department permissions. And because we also created the team's permission, which will have a different outcome as a result based on the team data of Carlos's contract, you can see in the dynamic permissions for this will be granted to Team 0, Team 1, and Team 3. How does the update event for dynamic permission work? Well, for account permission, we are not only looking for changes inside the personal data fields coming from the source system. For dynamic permission, we also look if the contract in condition attribute of a business rule is still valid for the rule and hasn't changed. Otherwise, if there are some condition changes, we also trigger an update event for the dynamic permissions of an account. Now let's move on to our second item, the target-specific DC and AD configuration, which will be available for the Active Directory on-premise systems. With this new functionality, we can configure the domain controller for Active Directory to be used in the entitlement actions. By default, we use the primary, as long as this one is available. When HelloID is trying to execute an action towards the on-premise Active Directory, we check if the primary domain controller is available. And when it is, all of the actions will get executed using this domain controller. When the primary domain controller isn't available, we use a different one from the domain, and we will keep using this one until the primary is available again. Then we will start using the primary again. It is also possible to manually select a domain controller. This can be done by enabling the toggle for manual domain controller selection. In here, you will find a list of all the domain controllers inside the Active Directory domain. Please be aware that if you're running multiple agents in the same Active Directory, this list can vary in some cases. In this case, we have a manual selection which we will provide with multiple domain controllers where we add 3 domain controllers in the selection list. This basically works in the same way as the automatic determination of the primary works because the top controller from the list is marked as the most important one, which we will try to use for handling the requests. If the topmost one isn't available, we will switch over to the second one. And if that one isn't available, we switch to the third. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please let us know if you have any additional questions. You can post your question in YouTube or send it to isupport@toolsforever.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive frequent updates about improvements and changes in HelloID. For now, have a wonderful day.